By the late 1960s, radio and television were part of our culture, part of our daily lives. The American military knew that, and those serving at the time of the Vietnam conflict had radio and television as part of their daily lives as well, through the Armed Forces Radio and Television Service. Three men who served at that time went on to become familiar to many of us through their careers in Cedar Rapids radio and television, and each is still on the air today.
People watching this, if they've been in the military, they'll understand what the purpose of Armed Forces Radio and TV is, especially if you're overseas. Because, yeah, sure, you've got the internet and you've got the other things now, but it's not the same. And I think it's the same as somebody talk to you. It's like you're talking directly to somebody. And I think it takes a military person to understand really what it was that you were trying to do over there.
AFBN News compiled from commercial and military news agencies. Good morning.
I was in college, and the situation was that you could get a student deferment. However, each time you applied for one, you moved further up the list. And I had talked with the Air Force recruiter in Cheyenne and told him that that's probably would be my choice when I finished school. In fact, one day I was going to visit a friend in Denver, so I called the draft office and said, just want to know where I am. And they said, well, we don't seem to find anything on you here. Let us look a little further. They said, oh, that's why it's in the typewriter. We're getting ready to draft you. And I said, well, I've already spoken with the Air Force recruiter. And he said, well, if you do that, no problem.
If you were drafted, which I was, then you served for 2 years, and they decided what you'd do. And I thought, well, I'd rather do something I want to do and sign up for 3 years, which is what I did.
Went to Newport, Rhode Island as a deckhand on a tugboat. My mother was a bit alarmed about this. My son on a tugboat in Rhode Island. But I said, Mom, that's not all bad. Nobody's shooting at me.
And they were perennially short of people to go into Armed Forces broadcasting. It's a high turnover. A lot of people tend to go commercial. So there's always a shortage. And the word came down, anybody interested in doing this, audition. So I auditioned, and a friend of mine did, and I think there were about 4 of us from the same office that all passed the audition. We all went.
My mother wrote my congressman and said, my son went to college for 2 years, worked at the radio station and theater. He wants to be a broadcaster. He'd like to be in Armed Forces Radio and Television. What can you do about this? So my congressman, somehow or another, got me sent to the U.S. Defense Information School at Fort Benjamin Harrison, Indiana, where I went through both courses of journalism and broadcasting.
This is the American Forces Radio Service, USS Hancock, and the Hancock time is 7:05. Well, hi there, and good morning. And we're here for another Monday morning, ready or not. The first Monday in February. It's February 2nd, 1970. And we're here with much more music. This is The Morning Thing, and I am Cary Hahn.
Then the computer spit my name out, and I got sent to the USS Hancock, CVA-19, World War II aircraft carrier off the coast of Vietnam. I served on one cruise, and people say, well, what did you do? And I say, remember Robin Williams, Good Morning Vietnam? It was like that, but not quite as funny.
And as far as Robin Williams and Good Morning Vietnam, that whole thing was a little silly. What we actually did was just tell the story the way it was and let the troops, analyze the news the way they wanted to. You didn't sugarcoat the war. At the same time, you didn't overdo the protests and things either. I tried to get a balanced coverage is what we tried to do.
I was a radio disc jockey, newsman. I was essentially in charge of the radio and TV station, and we had 3,500 sailors on ship, and we were their entertainment.
Right. We closed the station in December of 1970 for some reason or other. I think it was just a repeater or something from other stations after that point. So then they gave me a truck and said, here. And so I had a one vehicle convoy to Da Nang, and it was on the side of a mountain called Monkey Mountain. So from Monkey Mountain, this is AFVN, Channel 85 AM, 99.9 FM, and Channel 13 TV. So I was on the radio in the morning, and then I worked in afternoon and evenings on the TV.
I was assigned to network headquarters, initially as a radio newscaster, initially as an overnight radio newscaster, and then moved to daytime, and within a couple of months was added to the television newscast, and I ended up sort of the poor man's Walter Cronkite doing the evening and late night TV news.
You know, you did everything from run the film chain to do sports, news, and on the radio I got to do, my thing. And I would never have had, that opportunity, in civilian life. It'd take decades to get all that experience compressed in a year or so in Vietnam.
Talk about experience. I got to play records. I got to read the news. We just did all sorts of things. And it was actually fun, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. We had great equipment in Armed Forces Radio and Television. Uncle Sam, spared no expense. We had really good stuff. I had better stuff in the Navy than a couple of the private radio stations I would later work at, and kind of became spoiled.
This is the United States Armed Forces Radio and Television Service.
There was a distinction made, it perhaps still is, between our target audience and what was referred to at the time as the shadow audience. The shadow audience is the indigenous population, which theoretically doesn't watch, but as a matter of reality, everybody knows they do. But you have to take their sensibilities into consideration. If, for example, the president of the local country were to be under international criticism of some kind, you'd have to tread very carefully with that. We were always respectful of local feelings as best we could, and fortunately there wasn't any particular local scandal that we had to be aware of. There were plenty of other things that we could report. But you do have to take that into account because the people watch.
It's like a separate thing. It's like, it could be another continent, really. Because, it's out there, and it could be outside your door. But basically, you're just imparting the information, and that's the way that I always felt that you had to do it. If you can't get too emotionally involved, you just try to tell the story, what's going on, and they didn't gloss over it. But by the same token, people that are in combat don't want to hear that endlessly, so you would also, that's why you had a pretty extensive sports cast on the TV, because, hey, people can relate to that, and that's not quite as, life-altering, perhaps, as some of the things closer to home.
I don't remember ever being told you absolutely cannot cover this. They said just exercise some judgment here. Don't try to juice it up too much. If it must be reported, then go ahead. And in fact, even during the Pueblo crisis, when we were on heightened alert and keeping multiple copies of everything that came over the teletypes and in constant contact with the network headquarters, I don't remember that anybody ever said that we couldn't cover the news. They said just be professional, keep in mind that what you say may have consequences.
My audience on Shipboard when we were off the coast of Vietnam was every sailor on that ship, from pilots to the aviation guys out on the deck, the enlisted men, the cooks, the guys who made the ship run, the admiral, to the lowliest of seamen. It was everybody. And that was the only entertainment we had. Now, sometimes people think, well, you're on a ship, you had safe duty. That's true. But right after I got there, I would hear things on the other side of the bulkhead, which is wall in Navy talk. I'm like, what am I hearing over there? And they said, oh, that's the bomb room. That's where they load the missiles and the bombs, and oh.